Caleb paid for a housekeeper, but what he brought back to his dust-choked ranch was a silence shaped like a woman. He was a man whittled down by grief, his stature compact and dense like a river stone, worn smooth by a current of loss that had stolen his wife and left his heart a barren landscape. The prairie wind that scoured his land seemed to have scoured all the words from him, too. His world was the creak of the windmill, the lowing of his few remaining cattle, and the hollow echo in the house where his daughter, Lily, moved like a ghost in miniature. He needed hands to do the work his own soul was too weary to command. So he had ridden into the grim settlement of Providence, his jaw set against the pitying glances, and made a transaction. He found her standing by the wall of the mercantile, a place where those with nothing left but the strength in their backs waited for a chance. Her name was Maeve, and the first thing anyone noticed was her height. She was a giantess in a world of average men, her head nearly brushing the doorframe, her frame long and stark. It was a magnificence that shamed the small-minded, and so they had made her an outcast. Caleb saw none of that. He saw the steadiness in her gaze, a deep, still water that promised no storms. He saw hands that, though large, were not clumsy but looked capable of mending the broken world he lived in. He paid the proprietor a month's wage in advance. "She'll cook and clean," the man had grunted, looking Maeve up and down like livestock. Caleb simply nodded. The ride back was wordless. Maeve sat straight-backed on the wagon seat, her belongings in a single, small bundle at her feet. She did not look at the vast, unforgiving land as if it frightened her, but rather as if she understood its language of endurance. When they arrived, the house sagged under the weight of its own sorrow. Dust motes danced like frantic spirits in the slivers of afternoon light. It was a cold place, a tomb where memories had been left to decay. Caleb gestured vaguely. "The kitchen is there. Lily's room. A room for you is at the back." He did not offer welcome. It was not a home he was offering, merely a place to exist in exchange for labor. Maeve looked at the small man, his shoulders burdened by more than just work, and simply inclined her head. The silence she brought with her was different from his. His was a hollow, echoing void. Hers was a weighted, patient quiet, full of unspoken things. Her first act was not to clean, but to open a window. The stale air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and sorrow, shuddered and fled as a clean, sharp breeze swept through the kitchen. Caleb, watching from the doorway of the barn, felt the shift as if it were a change in barometric pressure. He saw her tie her hair back with a scrap of cloth and roll up her sleeves, revealing long, pale arms corded with a surprising strength. She moved with an economy of motion, a quiet grace that seemed impossible for a woman of her scale. There was no clatter of pans, no bustling indignation at the state of the place. She simply began. She filled a bucket from the pump, her movements rhythmic and sure. She scrubbed the floorboards until the grain of the wood, long hidden under a film of grime, reappeared like a forgotten memory. She washed the single window over the sink until the light that filtered through was no longer jaundiced and weak, but clear and honest. Caleb found himself watching her for long stretches, his own work forgotten. He had expected noise, perhaps the humming of a woman unused to such quiet, or the brusque efficiency of someone just doing a job. Instead, there was only the soft whisk of a broom, the gentle slosh of water, the quiet scrape of a knife against a cutting board as she prepared a simple meal from his meager stores. That evening, the house smelled of stew and baking bread. It was a scent so alien, so reminiscent of a life he had locked away, that it struck him like a physical blow. He entered the kitchen to find a loaf of bread, golden and round, cooling on the counter. A bowl of thick stew sat on the table, steam rising from it like a prayer. He ate in his usual silence, but it felt different. The food was not just sustenance, it was an offering. It was warmth. He looked at her hands as she cleared the dishes, the way they handled the chipped porcelain with a care it did not deserve. He saw a deep, faded scar that ran across her knuckles, a testament to some past hardship she did not speak of. In the days that followed, the quiet transformation continued. She mended his torn shirts with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She polished the tarnished silver of his late wife's candlesticks until they gleamed. She was not erasing the past, he realized, but tending to it, giving it a quiet dignity. She was sweeping out the ashes so that something new might have room to grow. Lily had not spoken more than a handful of words since the day her mother had been laid in the earth behind the house. She was a small, watchful creature, a pale imitation of the laughing child she had once been. She observed Maeve from the shadows of doorways, her large eyes taking in every quiet action. She saw the tall woman coaxing a flame in the cold hearth, her large form casting a comforting, flickering shadow on the wall. She saw her find the small, broken-limbed doll that had been discarded in a corner and, with a needle and thread, carefully stitch its cloth arm back into place. One afternoon, Maeve was sitting on the porch steps, mending one of Lily's worn dresses. Lily approached, her bare feet silent on the wooden planks. She stood for a long time, just watching the needle dip and rise. Then, she pointed a small, hesitant finger at the mended doll, which Maeve had placed on the railing to air out. Maeve paused her work. She looked at the child, her expression unreadable but gentle. She picked up the doll and held it out. Lily took it, her small fingers tracing the new, neat stitches on its arm. She looked up at Maeve, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in her young eyes, and then she scurried back inside without a word. The next morning, Caleb found a piece of drawing paper on the kitchen table. On it, in the wavering charcoal lines of a child, was a picture. There was a tall, slender flower reaching for the sun. Beside it stood a small, solid rock. And nestled between them, a tiny green sprout was pushing its way out of the earth. He knew, with a certainty that tightened his chest, what it meant. The flower was Maeve. The rock was him. And the sprout was Lily, finding her place between them. He tucked the drawing into his shirt pocket, the paper crinkling against his ribs. Later that day, as he watched Maeve hang laundry on the line, her form silhouetted against the vast blue sky, Lily came to stand beside him. She tugged on his sleeve. He looked down. "Papa," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "Does she make the house warm, too?" The question was so simple, so profoundly true, that it cracked the frozen shell around his heart. He couldn't answer. He could only kneel and pull his daughter into a hug that felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. He felt the child's small frame in his arms, a fragile thing he had nearly forgotten how to hold. The world turned white without warning. The wind, which had been a constant, mournful companion, became a shrieking banshee, hurling ice and snow against the small cabin with the force of a physical assault. The sky, the land, the horizon, it all dissolved into a swirling vortex of white. The blizzard descended upon them like a shroud, cutting them off from the rest of the world, trapping the three of them in the fragile wooden box of the house. Sound became distorted, the howl of the storm was a constant, deafening roar, punctuated by the sharp crack of freezing timber. Inside, the world shrank to the flickering circle of light cast by the fire in the hearth. For 2 days, they existed in this suspended state. Maeve kept the fire fed, her movements calm and deliberate, a steady anchor in the chaos. Caleb secured the barn, his face grim as he fought his way back to the house through chest-deep drifts. But on the 3rd day, a new, more terrifying storm began to brew inside their walls. Lily began to cough, a dry, rasping sound that echoed the scraping of the wind against the windows. By nightfall, she was burning with fever. She lay in her small bed, her skin flushed, her breathing shallow and ragged. Caleb was undone. The sight of his sick child transported him back to another sickbed, another fever he had been powerless to stop. The same helpless, suffocating panic clawed at his throat. He paced the small room, his hands clenched, his mind a maelstrom of fear and grief. He was the rock from Lily's drawing, but he felt himself crumbling into sand. It was Maeve who became the anchor. She moved to the bedside, her large hand surprisingly gentle as she brushed the damp hair from Lily's forehead. "Boil water," she said to Caleb, her voice low and steady, cutting through his panic. "And bring me the driest linens you have." He stared at her, frozen. She met his gaze, and there was no pity in her eyes, only a quiet, insistent strength. Now, Caleb, the use of his name, the firm command, broke the spell. He moved, his actions clumsy at first, but then surer as he followed her instructions. She seemed to know exactly what to do, a competence a stark contrast to his own spiraling terror. She created cool compresses for Lily's head, her touch soothing and methodical. They settled into a desperate rhythm dictated by the rise and fall of the child's fever. The long hours of the night bled into one another, marked only by the sputtering of the lamp and the relentless howl of the wind outside. Caleb sat in a chair in the corner, a silent, rigid sentinel of fear, watching Maeve work. He watched her coax spoonfuls of broth between Lily's cracked lips. He watched her bathe the child's feverish body with a tenderness that made his throat ache. She was tireless, her focus absolute. She seemed to draw strength from some deep, hidden wellspring within her. In the deepest hours before dawn, when the fever was at its worst and Lily was tossing in delirium, Caleb finally broke. "I can't lose her, too," he whispered, the words torn from him, raw and ragged. He buried his face in his hands, his compact frame shaking with silent sobs. The grief he had held at bay for so long finally overwhelmed him. Maeve did not stop her ministrations, but she spoke, her voice soft against the backdrop of the storm. "I know." She waited a moment, dipping a cloth into a basin of cool water. "My mother used to say that some people are given a heavier burden to carry, not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to bear it." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "You think I'm strong?" The question was laced with bitter self-recrimination. "I think," she said, wringing out the cloth, "that you are still standing. And that takes more strength than most people will ever know." They fell silent again, but the space between them had changed. His confession of fear had built a fragile bridge. Later, as she prepared a poultice of herbs she had found in a tin in the pantry, he asked her, "Why were you in Providence?" "Alone." Her hand stilled for a barest second. "My height," she said simply, her back to him. "It is a curiosity to some. A threat to others. It makes it hard to find a place. After my family passed, there was nowhere else to go." She did not elaborate, but he understood. He saw a lifetime of averted gazes, of cruel whispers, of profound loneliness. He had been so consumed by his own isolation that he had never considered hers. He was a man grieving a loss, she was a woman grieving a life she was never allowed to have. In the crucible of the storm, watching this quiet, capable woman fight for his daughter's life, he finally saw her. Not as a giantess, not as a housekeeper, but as Maeve. The fever broke with the dawn. As the first pale, watery light of the sun filtered through the snow-caked window, Lily's breathing eased. The flush receded from her cheeks, leaving her pale and exhausted, but blessedly cool to the touch. The storm outside had exhausted itself as well. The wind had died down to a low moan, and a profound, crystalline silence had fallen over the snow-covered world. Maeve, who had not slept in 2 days, finally slumped in her chair, her face etched with fatigue but her eyes clear. Caleb stood by the bed, his hand resting on his daughter's chest, feeling the steady, miraculous rhythm of her breathing. He looked over at Maeve, and a wave of gratitude so immense it was painful washed over him. She had saved his child. She had stood firm when he had crumbled. She had brought a steady, unwavering light into the darkest night of his soul. No words were exchanged. None were needed. He went to the kitchen and put the kettle on the fire. He made coffee, strong and black, and brought a cup to her. Their fingers brushed as she took the tin mug, a brief, fleeting contact that sent a jolt of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the coffee. The silence that settled in the house now was not the empty, aching silence of grief, nor the tense silence of strangers. It was a new kind of quiet, a shared, comfortable space, filled with the unspoken understanding of what they had just endured together. They moved around each other with a new awareness, a quiet choreography of mutual respect. He saw the way she favored her left shoulder when she was tired. She saw the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he was worried. They were learning the language of each other's movements, the dialect of each other's quietude. The house, once a tomb, felt like a sanctuary, a ship that had weathered a terrible storm. When Lily was strong enough to sit up and drink a little broth, she looked from her father's face to Maeve's. A small, weak smile touched her lips. The sight of it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. Caleb knew then that nothing could ever be the same. The transaction was over. The arrangement was void. This woman was no longer just his housekeeper. He didn't know what she was, but he knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that he could not bear the thought of the house without her. They were running low on salt and flour, and the medicine was nearly gone. "I have to go to town," he said a few days later, the words feeling heavy in the quiet room. Maeve simply nodded. "I'll come with you," she stated, not a question. Lily shouldn't be left. He met her eyes and agreed. It felt right. It felt necessary. They would face the world together. The sleigh ride into Providence was stark and beautiful. The world was a blank canvas of white, the sky a piercing, brilliant blue. The air was so cold it felt sharp in their lungs. Caleb drove the horse, his shoulders set. Maeve sat beside him, wrapped in a heavy blanket, a silent, statuesque presence. As they entered the town's main street, the familiar pattern began. Heads turned. People stopped and stared. Men on the boardwalk nudged each other, their whispers like the hiss of snakes in the snow. Caleb felt the old, familiar urge to shrink, to make himself smaller, to disappear. But then he glanced at Maeve. She was looking straight ahead, her face a calm, stoic mask, but he saw the tension in her hands where she clutched the blanket. He saw the subtle tightening of her jaw. She was enduring it, just as she had likely endured it her entire life. This time, however, the sight of her quiet suffering did not make him want to hide. It ignited a slow, hot anger in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. They stopped in front of the mercantile. As Caleb helped Maeve down from the sleigh, her large hand resting briefly in his, a voice boomed from the doorway. It was Mr. Griggs, the portly, red-faced man who had arranged their transaction. "Well, look what the blizzard dragged in," Griggs sneered, his small eyes running over Maeve's tall frame with open contempt. "Still got your giant, I see, Caleb. Bet she's strong as an ox. Good for pulling a plough when the horse gives out," a few of the onlookers snickered. Maeve flinched as if struck. Her face, which had been so composed, paled. She took a half-step back, her instinct to retreat, to make herself invisible, warring with the physical impossibility of it. She started to turn away, to hide herself behind the bulk of the sleigh, her shame a palpable thing. Caleb felt her movement, felt her spirit withdrawing. He saw the deep hurt in her eyes, a wound that Griggs's casual cruelty had just torn open anew. In that moment, something shifted inside him. The rock of his grief, which had been slowly cracked and warmed, finally broke apart, and what emerged was not the timid man who hid from the world, but the man he was supposed to be. The man his wife had loved. The man his daughter needed. He had spent years letting the world make him feel small. He would not let it do the same to her. He did not look at Griggs. He did not acknowledge the snickering crowd. His entire world narrowed to the tall, proud, wounded woman standing beside him in the snow. He saw the years of loneliness she carried in the slump of her shoulders, the years of ridicule she held in her downcast eyes. He saw the gentle strength that had saved his daughter, the quiet grace that had brought his home back to life, the profound resilience that had allowed her to stand at all. The thought of her walking away, of her believing for 1 second that she was anything less than magnificent, was more than he could bear. All the unspoken gratitude, the burgeoning respect, the deep, terrifying warmth he had begun to feel for her, coalesced into a single, clarifying purpose. He took a step toward her, closing the small space she had tried to create between them. He reached out and took her hand. Her hand was cold from the winter air, but he held it firmly in his own, his grip warm and absolute. The crowd fell silent, their curiosity piqued by this unexpected turn. Maeve looked up, startled, her eyes wide with confusion. He met her gaze, and for the first time, he let her see past the walls, let her see the truth of what he felt. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried across the snow-dusted street with the clear, ringing authority of a bell. It was not directed at Griggs or the town. It was directed only at her. A promise. A declaration. A choice. "You're coming with me," he said. The words were simple, the same ones he might have used to call a stray calf, but the meaning was as vast as the prairie sky. It meant you are not alone. It meant you are not an outcast. It meant you belong with me. He gave her hand a gentle tug, leading her past the gaping proprietor and toward the mercantile door. He was no longer a man whittled down by grief. He was a man standing his ground, claiming his future. He was Caleb, and he was walking into the store with the woman he loved. The town could stare all it wanted. He didn't care. He had found his home in the shelter of a giantess, and he would not be made to feel small again. The journey back to the ranch was as silent as the first one had been, but it was a silence of an entirely different quality. The first had been the silence of strangers, a void of uncertainty and emotional distance. This was the silence of a question asked and answered, a promise made and accepted. It was a comfortable, breathing silence, full of weight and meaning. Maeve's hand, which he had released once they were inside the store, now rested on the seat between them, not quite touching his, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from it. He did not look at her, keeping his eyes on the path ahead, but he was aware of her in a way that was new and overwhelming. He was aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the way she tilted her head to watch a hawk circle in the winter sky, the quiet strength in her posture. She was no longer just a presence in his house, she was a presence in his life, and the thought filled him not with fear but with a profound and steadying peace. When they arrived back at the ranch, the late afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across the snow. It made the world look soft and new. Lily ran out onto the porch to greet them, her face bright with a joy he had not seen in years. She hugged his legs, then turned and, without hesitation, wrapped her small arms around Maeve's waist in a fierce, welcoming embrace. Maeve's hand came down to rest on Lily's head, a gesture of gentle benediction. Over the child's hair, her eyes met Caleb's. In that shared glance, a whole conversation took place, an acknowledgement of the family they were becoming. The next day, Caleb went out to the barn and retrieved the old porch swing his wife had loved, the one he hadn't been able to look at since she died. He carried it out and began the work of repairing the frayed rope, of sanding down the weathered wood. Maeve came out and watched him for a moment, then went and fetched a rag and a tin of oil. She worked alongside him, her long, graceful fingers rubbing life back into the dry wood, while he knotted the new ropes with steady hands. Their movements were synchronized, an easy partnership that needed no words. At one point, her hand brushed his as they both reached for the same tool. They both froze for a second, a spark of awareness passing between them, before he smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. And she smiled back. As the sun began to set, casting the snow-covered prairie in hues of pink and lavender, the swing was finished. It hung from the rafters of the porch, solid and secure. Caleb tested it, then looked at Maeve and gestured for her to sit. She sat, and he sat beside her. The swing was built for two people of average size, so they were pressed close together, his shoulder against her arm, his hip against hers. He was not intimidated by her height, he was anchored by her presence. The closeness felt right. It felt like coming home. Lily came and curled up on Maeve's lap, her small head resting against Maeve's chest, and soon her soft, even breathing filled the quiet air. They sat there for a long time, the three of them, gently swinging as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The house behind them was warm, a soft yellow light glowing in the windows. It was no longer a tomb of memories but a vessel of life, filled with the scent of baking bread and the quiet promise of tomorrow. Caleb looked at the vast, endless horizon, a sight that had once mirrored his own crushing loneliness. Now, it looked different. It looked like a future. He thought of the man he had been, a man made small by his sorrow, and the woman beside him, a woman made an outcast by her stature. The world had tried to define them by their external shapes, by what they lacked or what they had in excess. But here, in the quiet peace of their own sanctuary, none of that mattered. He was not a short rancher, and she was not a giant woman. They were just Caleb and Maeve, two solitary souls who had been strong enough to bear their burdens alone, but who had discovered they were infinitely stronger together. Their hearts, once frozen by grief and loneliness, had thawed in the warmth of each other's care, and had found, against all odds, that they were a perfect fit. He reached over, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the seat between them, and in the deepening twilight, he held on.